Is it fair to say though that and it usually isn't fair to say this, and I get corrected. Is it fair to say that the upshot of where we are now is the measurement problem, as you laid it out, has been sort of solved? There is now a scientific problem, but is the role of philosophers now to clarify, I mean, just what this scientific problem is, just what a solution would be like, and still to adjudicate between the different contending theories? Because this is what it seems like. For instance, David, when you and I spoke with Sean Carroll, it seems like you are disputing something about the philosophical plausibility of something like the many worlds theory.
I think, and my bet is that Tim is going to agree with this, or is going to take objection to one sentence, as he often does. But I mean, I take it. My bet is that Tim is going to mostly agree with this. It contributes negatively to the advance of our understanding of these matters to start out by trying to distinguish between the proper role of philosophers in this discussion and the proper role of physicists in this discussion. It has been of the very essence of the productivity of this field over the past 50 years that those kinds of disciplinary boundaries have largely been ignored or evaporated, okay? And you find plenty of cases of people employed in philosophy departments saying, hey, look at the empirical consequences that this proposal would have. Maybe somebody ought to go out and do an experiment like this, and so on and so forth. This is, so yeah, no, I don't think, I think the role of philosophers and physicists who are interested in these questions is to talk about them and try to get to the answers. And I don't see, it strikes me as unhelpful to start out by asking what's the proper role of philosophers in these conversations.
I think that maybe the problem was with my phrasing it, and maybe I shouldn't have distinguished between philosophers and physicists, but what I should have focused my question on was whether there are new philosophical problems. There's a philosophical problem of clarifying what the scientific problem is, and there are philosophical problems in figuring out which of the competing physical theories is the right one. And I shouldn't have been framing the question about the role of philosophers and physicists.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything David said, and I want to object a little more to what to the thrust of what you're asking. So let me try it this way. The one question is, do you want the philosopher versus physicist contrast in this thing at all? I think the answer is no. Here's a contrast which is relevant. It's one we already talked about. Are you an instrumentalist? That is your attitude, I just want to make good predictions. I just want some gadget that will allow me to make good predictions. I don't know, build bridges and, make computer chips that work. And that's all I care about. Like, I just am not interested in how the world really is. That's one group of people. People can have that attitude. I don't understand it. It's not my attitude. It's not why I went into this. I don't care about computer chips. I don't particularly care about making predictions, except insofar as I think they're evidence for or against theories, right? Then you have the people who just, their attitude is, I want to kind of figure out how the world is. I want to see how far I can get in that enterprise. Probably we'll never be sure. Certainly there'll be different options, but for each option, you want to evaluate what would its empirical consequences be, what other virtues or defects of a more abstract type might it have that make it plausible or implausible. I don't think any of that is the province of philosophers as opposed to physicists, right? If you're not thinking about that as a physicist, you're not doing good physics. And if you're not thinking about that as a philosopher, you're not doing good philosophy. I mean, I just don't see that disciplinary boundary is playing any role here. I think as a practical matter, philosophers are a bit more trained to hear when words are being used ambiguously, when there's a little slip in an argument because of, equivocation or a logical slip. We're trained to do that, and sometimes we can point that out more directly than someone with a physics training can, whereas someone with a physics training can point out a mathematical slip more easily. I mean, there are different strengths and weaknesses that the disciplinary training give you, but I don't see any other way to divide this between physics and philosophy at all.
I still want to push back against you in the sense that I don't know if you have said this in writing or if this is just something you've said to me, but I think you have said, like, physicists don't understand physics. And do you think that you have not said this, Tim?
Oh, that's a sociological claim about the actual content of a standard physics training today. Physics itself as a discipline shouldn't be involved in it. It should be. It's just physics has gotten sick, right? The discipline of physics, in its own terms, has become ill because of quantum mechanics. We all hope, and David hopes, and I hope, to a little bit, point this out and maybe lead it in a more healthy direction. But that's just a sociological claim. It's not a claim about the disciplines per se, right? The aim of the disciplines.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are physicists who do good physics and physicists who do bad physics, and there are philosophers who do good philosophy and philosophers who do bad philosophy. That's the distinction here, not the distinction between the proper object of study of one or the other of these disciplines. So yeah, when Tim says physicists don't understand physics, he's pointing to the fact that there are a lot of physicists who do physics badly.
Yeah. And in the other direction, what I've certainly said many times publicly, which is just doing the same point in the other direction. The greatest philosopher of physics in the first half of the 20th century was Albert Einstein, and in the second half was John Bell. And they didn't have philosophy degrees. But they had the intellectual equipment to do good philosophy.
Right.
And did it.
Right.
So that still seems to, maybe we're arguing over something that is uninteresting to people or doesn't need to be argued, but in so much as I sort of reframed my point away from talking about philosophers and toward talking about philosophical thinking, it seems like you are agreeing with me that this philosophical thinking is very important and there are still deep philosophical problems.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe here's a way to put it in perspective. There was, you look at the way philosophers attended to physics in the early part of the 20th century, people like Reichenbach say, well, I don't even know if Reichenbach is a good example. There's a certain way of philosophers attending to physics, okay, where it does seem like there's a clean distinction, there's a clean division of labor, okay, that you're used to getting a theory presented to you, which is for certain kinds of standard scientific purposes finished, a finished product, a finished object. And what you're supposed to do is clean up the vocabulary a little bit, lend an ear to these possible confusions or ambiguities, and reconstruct the theory in a way that's supposed to give you in clearer language what you're presuming the physicists had in mind in the first place, in conceptually clearer language, in logically clearer language, so on and so forth. The advent of discussions of the measurement problem, and now I'm just citing a sociological and historical fact, changed that very dramatically. Okay. The attitude in physics, okay, was that there was no such problem, or that the problem was merely verbal, or that the problem was merely philosophical, or something like that. Okay. And it was the opinion, like I said, ironically, of people employed in philosophy departments that the physicists didn't understand that this was a scientific problem. Okay. And so it became our task as we understood it, not at all to engage in the kind of activity I was just describing, but to forcefully tell and clearly say why the physicists were misunderstanding the physical project itself, okay? And that the physicists were doing physics horrifically badly, okay? And I must say, I think both Tim and I had the experience, because our ages are not too dissimilar and so on and so forth, in going through this, that this led to a much more exciting and fruitful kind of relationship between people working in philosophy departments and people working in physics departments than you commonly ran into before that.